Welcome to the Crunch Time YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about which of the following AFC teams have the best chance to knock off Kansas City in the playoffs. So before I start talking about the three keys that I think are the most important to beating Kansas City, I'm going to name the 7 teams that I think have the best chance, and there are only 7 teams in the AFC that are still in it. They are the Miami Dolphins, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Indianapolis Colts, the Baltimore Ravens, the Tennessee Titans, the Cleveland Browns, and the Buffalo Bills. So, one of these 7 teams is not going to be making the playoffs, and there is some debate over what the team is going to be that's going to miss it. It's probably going to be Miami or the Colts. The Browns are probably going to beat the Steelers. Dolphins might lose to the Bills. Titans are probably going to beat the Texans. And Colts are probably going to beat the Jaguars. And Browns will probably beat Mason Rudolph-less Steelers. So it's going to be Miami or Indianapolis, whatever of the two. But they're still going to be both on this list since we haven't had the full playoff picture decided yet. So now let's get into the 3 keys to beating Kansas City. So the most important key, the number 1, is you have to get turnovers and you have to limit big plays. So those are kind of 2 things in one. Because Kansas City, very explosive offense, you have to capitalize off of when they're willing to go deep, looking for a deep shot, a big play. You have to get turnovers off of that, and you have to stop for big plays. Second key is your offense has to have long, sustainable drives that go like 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes into a quarter. That keeps Patrick Mahomes on the bench just waiting. And your third down defense has to be really good to stop Kansas City. So now let's get into a few stats I'm going to be sharing, and I'm going to rank the teams in order, I think, from least likely to most likely to beat Kansas City in the playoffs. So the first stat is turnovers forced, because obviously it's very important. You have to force turnovers against Kansas City. The Steelers and Dolphins have the 2 best defenses, probably, of the 7 teams that I have listed here. And they've been forcing a lot of turnovers this year. I believe the Dolphins got 2 or 3 interceptions on Patrick Mahomes when they played him earlier this year. The Colts also have a really good defense, but then the other 4 teams, they're more up and down. They're a little bit more hot, cold, streaky. You don't know what you're going to get like on a consistent week-to-week basis like Pittsburgh or Miami. Now, let's look at the turnover percentage by drives. So how many percent of their drives on defense end up resulting in them getting a turnover? So you see the Dolphins, Colts, and Steelers on top again. We know these are the best defenses, and you see the other 4 teams at the bottom. It is interesting to know that the Ravens are one of the lowest teams, considering they forced probably the most fumbles in the league, because Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, 2 of the best forced fumbling corners in the league. Now, let's look at big plays allowed. And this is actually more important probably than the other stat, because if you want to beat Kansas City, you have to limit the big plays. And here, the Ravens are number 1, and they've only allowed 4 big plays all season. And here we see some of the weaknesses of Miami's defense. They're number 10 by quite a decent bit. 3 off from the 3-way tie at 4th place. They've allowed 10 40-plus yard plays. Miami does have this issue sometimes where they are a little bit more prone to allowing big chunk gains. Now, one thing I am going to add is Patrick Mahomes is not playing Week 17 against the Chargers. Chad Henne is. And this is actually really important. We saw what happened when Lamar Jackson and the Ravens rested quite a few starters last year. They had a first-round bye. And what happens when you don't play football for like 2-3 weeks is you get a little rusty, and whatever team plays Kansas City that first week, they have to go very quick in the beginning. They need to take advantage, because there's no way beating Kansas City if you do not take advantage of them in the beginning. And you still have a lower chance to win, even if you get an early lead. Now I'm going to be looking at time of possession. This is more of a long drives, no turnovers, keep the clock running mentality, one of the keys I noted. And the Bills, who are going to be the second seed, I believe. It's going to be between them and the Steelers for the 2 seed. They are probably many people's front runners to beating Kansas City if you had to pick someone in the AFC. And the big reason is their defense isn't great, but that offense is really good with Josh Allen. If he wasn't in a year where Patrick Mahomes and Rodgers are having historic seasons, basically, he'd probably be an MVP candidate, or at least top 1 or 2. He's doing great, but the Browns are also an interesting team because they have a really good ground game. They have had issues with COVID and players haven't been able to play, especially last week when they lost to the Jets, which was because they had for first 3-4 wide receivers were not out, playing with practice squad wide receivers. So they need to fix that stuff up for playoff time. But we see the Steelers and Titans are at the bottom here. And the big issue with the Steelers is they do not have a consistent run game. That's been their biggest weakness all season. They've had Big Ben throwing the ball 40 times almost every single game. So that's why they could have issues against Kansas City. Really good defense, but they cannot run if their playoff hopes depended on it. Now we're going to look at turnover percentage on offense. How many percent of your drives end up with a turnover? And we see the Titans, Steelers, and Colts are all top 3. While the Steelers have had a lot of issues, they normally don't commit too many turnovers. They have been a little more turnover prone the last few weeks. But the first 11 games of the season, Big Ben was doing very well with the turnovers. He has gotten a little less, let's say, consistent with his play recently. His last few games, they lost 3 straight, but they're peaking at the right time, and he's not going to be playing this week, which I think is actually good for them. He is older. He needs a game off now because they had a very early bye week too, which never helps. So that's good for them. But we see the Bills and Ravens-Browns are at the bottom. And these are probably the 3 most explosive offenses here. But if you're going to have an explosive offense, you are more prone to committing turnovers. That's why a run-heavy team like the Titans is number 1 by a long shot. Nobody is within 1% of them on the turnover percentage. Now we're going to look at yards per drive. So this is how many yards a team will get per drive. And again, we see the Steelers and Dolphins at the bottom. This is a sign we've been seeing almost every single offensive stat. The Steelers and Dolphins are not the 2 better offensive teams. If you had to rank these offenses, they'd probably be the bottom 2 teams. And with Ryan Fitzpatrick out against the Buffalo Bills, we're probably going to have to rely on Tua. And I don't know how much you want to rely on a rookie QB in the playoffs. So obviously, Buffalo, Tennessee, Cleveland, very explosive offenses. Titans relying a lot on Derrick Henry, and he is really good in the winter months. But we did see something against Green Bay, which is a little concerning. And that defense is miserable, and Derrick Henry has to start off hot and doing really well, as that really helps the defense, their confidence and everything. Because if they don't score the first drive or 2, the game is basically over for Tennessee. They're such a run-heavy team that once you put the ball in Tannehill's hand, it makes the team so one-dimensional, there's no chance at them basically winning. Now we're going to be looking at third down conversion rate on defense, which is the conversion rate they've allowed. And this is actually a really interesting stat. And we see what I'm saying about Tennessee and their defense. They are allowing almost 5% of the third downs on defense they face to be converted. That is terrible. A playoff team or a team that wants to contend cannot be allowing that many third downs. While they have played a lot of good offenses, that is just not how you can play defense. This defense is very important in the playoffs. Everything gets tighter, more details. There's not as much room for mistake. And with a defense that is as miserable as the Titans, that's a really big weakness for them. But we see the Dolphins number 1 here by decent amount. While their offense isn't as great, this is a really good defense. even if they don't do much here, they have a really good future, probably going to have a top 5 pick in whatever pick they get. Now we're going to be looking at, I believe, one last stat, which is pressure percentage. And this is also important, and again, we see the Titans at the bottom. But so this is how often each team brings pressure to the quarterback, or our opposing quarterbacks get pressured. And we see the Steelers, Ravens, and Dolphins, numbers 1 through 3 here. Ravens have a really weird defense. It feels like they've had issues with COVID, injuries. Their defense is just so hot and cold. If their defense is playing really good, it's a good week for them, then you can rely on them. But if it's a bad week for this defense, they're going to lose you the game. We also see the Colts and the Bills bring a decent amount of pressure, but the Browns and the Titans, under 20% of plays are they bringing pressure. That's not what you want to see against Patrick Mahomes. You cannot let this guy sit in the pocket and just dot you up. You have to bring pressure to him. This is why teams like the Falcons, they get destroyed at the end of games. They can't bring pressure to opposing QBs. Mahomes had like 15 seconds on one play where he threw to like 30 yards to Travis Kelce last week. You can't give him that much time in the pocket. And that's why teams like Pittsburgh have had success. They're not giving opposing teams a lot of time in the pocket. And they have to make quick decisions, and often they can cause a lot of mistakes. Now we're going to be looking at the order I think the teams can beat Kansas City from 7th to 1st. And number 7, I have the Tennessee Titans. I've talked a lot of trash about the Titans right now, and it's because I believe they do not have a real chance of beating Kansas City. While they were really good last year, made it to the conference championship, I just don't believe they have it this year. While their offense has definitely improved, you can't beat Kansas City with this miserable of a defense. And very few offenses can outscore Kansas City. And if this game gets into a shootout, which I very well think it could if these two teams happen to play, I don't think Ryan Tannehill can keep up with Patrick Mahomes. Mike Vrabel, he's a good coach, but he just doesn't have... His offenses aren't as great as like Andy Reid can do. And this team would just get destroyed by Travis Kelce, Mecole Hardman, Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins. That's why I have them 7th below the Miami Dolphins, who are 6th. While this team has a really good defense, probably top 3 of these teams here, maybe even 2nd, this offense is just miserable. I honestly think the Dolphins are the worst team on this list, but football's all about matchups. The Buccaneers can destroy the Packers and then next week lose to the Bears. It's all about how teams match up against each other. And the Dolphins have a chance if it gets into a close defensive game. But if this game ends up getting into a shootout, they're going to need Fitzmagic, or else this game is going to get far away from them very quickly. Now it gets interesting because the other 5 teams, the Bills, the Browns, the Ravens, the Colts, and the Steelers, all in my opinion have solid chances, and I think they'd all put up a fighting chance to win. But number 5, I do have the Colts, and they just don't have really the star power. And this team also might not even make the playoffs. We've seen this team fall apart. They did that against Pittsburgh last week, and you don't want to have that against Kansas City. This defense is also heavily reliant on DeForest Buckner, and they need him to play. While I do think he will, that would definitely help this run defense so much. We saw when he missed a game what happened as they let Derrick Henry get like 1,000 rushing yards on them. But this offense is still a little inconsistent, relying a lot on Jonathan Taylor, Phillip Rivers finding his weapons, which are alright, but it's not like above average. Maybe it's like league average at best. Like compared to some of the other teams here, it's not as great. And Phillip Rivers also isn't as explosive of a QB, isn't as mobile. And this Kansas City defense is kind of sneaky good, so you have to be careful for that. That's why I have him 5th behind the Cleveland Browns. I actually think the Cleveland Browns would have put up a pretty interesting fight against the Chiefs. Myles Garrett, really good pass rush with the Browns. Even if their pressure percentage is low, Garrett has missed quite a bit of time. They need him to do pretty well. And if his defense, which has cost them a lot of games, or just doesn't step up most of the time, if they can play well, Baker is known to do good in bigger moments. Did that in college. I believe he went to Oklahoma. But if Baker's having a good game like he was against Baltimore, he almost has zero mistakes. I could see this team winning just the way they play. Once this team is in a groove, the run-pass option for this team, Kevin Stefanski, he's been a great coach for Baker, really got him to play like a top 10 quarterback, which the Browns fans expected him to play like. And that's really what this team is hoping for, Baker to play like a top 10 QB. And this team has a solid chance to make the Super Bowl if Baker's playing like a top 10 QB. At number 3, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this was a tough team to put at number 3 just because of how good this defense is. And to stop the Chiefs, you want a really good defense. But this offense is so inconsistent, it's really hard to rely on, especially the way Big Ben has been playing as of lately. Claypool's not been doing as great. Juju had a good week last week, but before that, the last 4 or 5 games, he's done practically nothing. Deontay Johnson drops almost everything thrown in his way. It's just a really tough offense to expect to play against Kansas City and outperform them. If they were to play, the dream scenario would be it's like a 20-20 game. You're relying on Big Ben, I guess, at the end. Well, you'd always would rather have your QB have the chance to win the game than Patrick Mahomes, because if you're relying on Patrick Mahomes not to score, the game is basically over. And at number 2, this might be surprising. The Ravens and Bills are still left. At number 2, I have the Buffalo Bills, which means Baltimore Ravens are number 1. I'll explain the Ravens later. But the Bills are a really good team, and I think that they could easily beat Kansas City. They have an explosive offense, and that's what you need to beat Kansas City. They have weapons. Stephon Diggs, John Brown, who's eventually going to play. Cole Beasley's been really good. Dawson Knox was showing something. Zach Moss. Singletary sometimes. So they have weapons with Josh Allen, but this defense is still not been as great. Yeah, they did good against New England, but almost every solid and above average defense has done good against New England. So I just don't think Buffalo has as good of a defense as the Ravens, and that's why I had to put the Ravens above them. And also why I had to put the Ravens at number 1 is just they could put all 3 keys together to beating Kansas City. If they're able to have long, sustainable drives, just running the ball, power run, counters, traps, sweeps, all that, they're able to not let Mahomes touch the ball more than like 3-4 times and a half, then I think they have a real fighting chance. Because I do think Mahomes will end up starting slowly. And what this team needs to do, I believe it will be like a 6 or 5 seed. And I do think that they will end up beating who they play in the first round. As long as it's not Buffalo. Then it's a little scary for them. But what they need to do is to start a consistent run game as soon as you can against Kansas City. You have to just run it like maybe 40, 50 times that game. Lamar is an alright thrower. He's average. But what he's going to beat teams off of is his running ability. And this defense has to show up. Marcus Peters has to be consistent. Marlon Humphrey has to do good. Have to get pressure. And I think this team really has a good chance to beat Kansas City. And if I had to pick one team, it would be the Baltimore Ravens. So here is my list altogether. Let me know who you think has the best chance to beat Kansas City. I will be making a playoff predictions video after the bracket's been decided, basically. So, thanks for watching, and have a great day.